So right now, our first panelist, and I'm going to ask them to come up after I've introduced them. Our first panelist is Dr. Leon Kochian. Leon joined the faculty at the University of Saskatchewan in August of 2016 as a professor of plant biology, as well as the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Global Food Security and Associate Director of the Global Institute for Food Security. Dr. Kochian's research deals with the molecular biology, physiology, and genetics of mineral ion transport and root biology. My oh my, lots of things going on there. Biology processes as they relate to mineral nutrient acquisition. Our second panelist is Dr. Stewart Smythe. Dr. Smythe is an assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture and Research or Resource Economics and holds the Industry Research Chair in Agri-Food Innovation at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Smythe's research focuses on innovation, agriculture, and the resulting impacts. Other research of Stewart's involves plant genotyping and phenotyping, in addition to examining how technologies are shared and accepted by society. And our third panelist is Dr. Michael Raine. Michael Raine is the managing editor of the Western Producer Publications, Canada's largest agricultural information organization, and has been a journalist with the company for 25 years. We're really appreciative of Western Producers' participation in our conference as well, and I'll just mention that off the top as well. Mike, another farmer as well on our panel. Mike farms on the family's fourth generation Saskatchewan Century Farm in the Regina Plains near Regina, producing grain, oilseeds, pulse crops, and livestock. He has been recognized by his journalism peers for achievements in writing, editing, and photography, including master's designations in American Agricultural Editors Association. So let's give a warm welcome to Leon, Stuart, and Michael for our last group presentation today.
All right, well, thanks, Marion. So as Marion said, I am recently joined the faculty at the University of Saskatchewan, came here after 30 years from Cornell University in upstate New York. And I'm a plant physiologist and plant molecular biologist, studies root biology, crop mineral nutrition, and really focusing on crop adaptation to stresses in the soil, so how to figure out how crops can do more with less. So my research is relatively basic, but it has an important agronomic end to it. And it's turned out over the last 10, 15 years as kind of the basic part of biology has gotten more sophisticated. It's getting easier and easier to translate basic discoveries, gene discovery, underlying, in this case, important agronomic traits, to crop improvement, working with plant breeders. And that's one of the reasons I came here, to work more intimately in the breadbasket of Canada. So the focus of my research, as I said, is roots. And really, roots are, as Morris had mentioned in his talk just before me, really considered the hidden half, particularly when it comes to plant breeding. Because roots grow in a very complex and opaque environment, for one thing, there has been less research done on roots because they're harder to study, but even more importantly, there's been almost no plant breeding because plant breeders have to be able to see what they're going to breed for, what they're going to phenotype for. But recent technological advances from fields like medical imaging and from computer science and computational advances are now allowing scientists to see roots, both root architecture, structure, and function, in ways that they couldn't do in the past. And I think there's been really a great increase in root research, and particularly as it relates to the real world. So, okay, why are we interested in root architecture and function? Well, I know Morris also used this slide. I know they're a bit hard to see with all these lights on, but it kind of shows you the potential. I think these are prairie grasses with enormous root systems, much larger than you generally see in crop systems. So really there's a lot of potential, like a frontier for crop improvement by starting to breed for crops with improved root traits. In breeding for bigger and better root systems with better root microbiomes, and I'll get to that in a few slides, I think we certainly have the potential to significantly decrease agriculture's carbon footprint and also generate crops that are more resilient to climate change. And as Morris had pointed out, just from the root side of crops alone, there have been significant, to something like billions of tons of carbon have been sequestered in roots since the dawn of the modern agriculture around the 1960s. Okay, so I remember this morning somebody mentioned we're not going to convince farmers to just use crops just because they have a bigger root system. I mean, they need to see increased yield or resilience. And that's, I think what we have here is a win-win. We can do both. In a lot of the work we're doing, it's turning out that the way a plant, and particularly crop plants, lay out their roots in 3 dimensions is important for efficient water and mineral nutrient acquisition, particularly under limiting conditions like drought, maybe related to climate change. So here I have a couple of different root architectures, and there's a lot of variation in this type of root architecture, depending, and different root ideotypes can be useful for improving efficiency of acquisition of different nutrients. If you're talking about a nutrient like phosphorus, phosphate, which is one of the most diffusion-limited mineral nutrients in the soil, and probably the most limiting macronutrient, because phosphate tends to get hung up on the surface of clay minerals, on the aluminum and iron hydroxides. So particularly in low P soils, what phosphate you have tends to be in the topsoil. So it's been found in recent years that this type of architecture that I show on the left of this slide, the plants have to put the roots where the phosphorus is. So phosphorus efficiency, which is a genetically based tolerance to low P, there are lines that do better than others under low P, they tend to put their roots out shallowly out into that topsoil to mine that phosphorus, okay? While if you look at the most mobile nutrients in the soil, which is water, and then often and nitrate will move with water, there you need deeper roots and a deeper root system to have a drought avoidance. And these are 2 areas where my lab has cloned, and so have another lab, genes that confer this type of architecture and improve phosphorus efficiency that we can use in molecular breeding, working with plant breeders. And a colleague of mine in Japan, Yukazu Uga, has cloned the first deep-rooting gene in rice, and he's shown that that confers, when he introduces it into shallow-rooting rice varieties, significantly increased performance under drought avoidance. So I mentioned that there's technologies that we've had to develop to study roots, be able to study roots on thousands of plants. And here's a system that I developed in my lab at Cornell, and actually it was developed by this very smart PhD student, Randy Clark, in biological engineering. We call it Root Reader 3D. And it involves a fixed camera controlled by a computer. The plants are grown in a hydroponic media, so an artificial media, and we're aware that's not soil, but we need a transparent media for a digital computer. And then the computer rotates the plant, the root system, and takes a series of 2D images, 100 2D images as the root system is rotated through 360 degrees. And then the Root Reader 3D software skeletonizes and thresholds these images and reconstructs the 100 2D images, each with slightly different view of the root system, into a 3-dimensional root architecture, and that's shown here for a rice seedling. And then it computes a number of different root architecture traits, so quantitative description of the root shape and how it occupies that volume. Now, this system allowed us to measure the root systems of thousands of plants, in this case sorghum. I was collaborating with this colleague shown here on the left, top left of the slide, Geringer Magalhães, who's a longtime collaborator in Brazil at Embrapa. And we were studying sorghum, an important food crop in Brazil, but also in Africa, where we're doing some developing country crop improvement. So we had a panel of 250 sorghum lines that capture most of the diversity of sorghum in the world. And we measured the root systems on actually thousands of sorghum plants with the replicates of these 250 lines. Now this panel we had already also sequenced in terms of DNA sequence, and so we had about 1 million genetic markers dispersed along the sorghum genome called SNPs. So we had digital DNA sequence data and digital phenotypic data. And we were able to use kind of sophisticated molecular and statistical genetic programs to actually identify a suite of genes that control improved performance on low P soils by changing the architecture. And so these genes in the P efficient line, and that's shown here, it might be a little bit hard to see, have a cadre of fine lateral roots in the top half of the root system. And here's a phosphorus inefficient line that doesn't have those. And we have found, working in the field of Embrapa, that these do confer a significant yield increase on low P soils. Okay, so this work was directed towards developing country agriculture, but all of this, particularly for phosphorus and water, have 100% relevance to Canadian agriculture, where I'm now directing a portion of our focus. Another new area, an exciting area in terms of plant biology, is the plant microbiome. Just like the human microbiome, the gut microbiome, where we, both humans, all complex organisms have co-evolved with the microbes in the environment for millions of years. And there's a whole cadres of different fungi and bacteria and viruses that live on the surface and within both the leaf and root cells of plants. And of course, we're focusing on the roots in the soil and the root microbiome. And it's now well established that this root microbiome is very important for root health, for root growth, and acquisition of mineral nutrients, and actually water too. So it's really a new frontier that we're studying for crop improvement. And here's another picture of the root microbiome. This is showing beneficial bacteria growing in a biofilm all around the surface of the root. These beneficial bacteria have been introduced a green fluorescent protein gene into them, so making this green color shows us where the bacteria are. So as we learn more about the crops and their interactions with their microbiome, we should be able to breed, and I use air quotes there, and select for agriculturally and environmentally favorable root microbiomes. And this will include microbiomes that help prevent the release of greenhouse gases, particularly the nitrogen oxides, N2O and NO, which have, as mentioned before several times, 300 times the greenhouse warming potential of CO2. So one of our major goals to kind of facilitate this, you have to be able to study the roots, is we're establishing a world-class center for root phenotyping and imaging at the Global Institute for Food Security and at the university. And this will involve continuing to advance our digital imaging and transparent media, but we now have the resources at the University of Saskatchewan to study and image roots on thousands of plants or hundreds of plants in soil. And one of those resources is the Canadian National Light Source. The National Synchrotron of Canada is located at the University of Saskatchewan, and they've got a commitment to use some of the beamlines for agriculture. And we'll be using the X-ray beamlines. Excuse me, this thing likes to jump forward. You can image in soil roots. So soil is relatively transparent to these X-rays, the roots aren't. So we can get very detailed images of root architecture and structure in soil, so in a more realistic environment. We have another, I guess I must press this too hard. A number of other tools that we're looking at, and this is work done by Emil Hallen, who's a physicist that works at GIFS. The synchrotron is a 1+ billion X-ray machine for us, $1 billion. There are more portable devices that make synchrotron quality X-rays using lasers, and Emil's been studying those. And this just is an image of a wheat panicle, and actually you can't see it here, but he's able to image the fusarium, the fungal infection in the wheat seeds. Roots also attenuate neutrons, and using a nuclear reactor, we can image roots in soil. This is a pea root. Again, the soil is transparent. We can get the 3D architecture. And I guess this is a physicist's idea of cramming 3 plants. So those are two root-bound wheat plants and a pea plant. And he's able to distinguish the root systems of all 3. So in my last slide, where are we going with this? Well, we can make fundamental discoveries and identify genes that underlie important root traits for architecture, for function, and then develop crops that with larger and more nutrient-efficient root systems that can maintain higher yields with less water and less NPK. Those would be cultivars that would be desirable for farmers. The win-win here is they also have bigger root systems and sequester more carbon. We can also actually work with breeders to just simply breed for bigger root systems. You can only go so big before there's a carbon cost to the shoot. So, but I think plants are pretty tricky and clever. I think there's ways that we can get around that to, again, increase carbon sequestration through greater root biomass. And then finally, the root microbiome that I've mentioned before, we should be able to breed for healthier and more efficient microbiomes with improve the root health, root growth. They help to acquire sparingly soluble nutrients like phosphorus for the roots, and also minimize the release of greenhouse gases, particularly the nitrogen oxides. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and I'd like to thank APAS and the organizers of the conference for extending an invitation for me to come and have a little quick chat with you, run through a bit of the research I've done over the last few years that sort of look at the environmental benefits from genetically modified canola, but I think these will start to spill over into corn and soybeans as they become more common across Western Canada. So we did a survey in 2006 of nearly 500 farmers across Western Canada. You can see some of the numbers that came out of the survey there. Farmers really saying that weed control had not changed between non-herbicide tolerant canola and GM herbicide tolerant canola. One of the interesting things is that we found there was a substantial direct benefit from the technology of about $15 an acre in terms of earlier seeding dates, reduced dockage. And farmers identified to us that there was a substantial drop in herbicide use the second year. I talked to a farmer from Davidson at one point, and he said he put on Roundup Ready canola and followed by a pulse crop, and the only time he went back to spray that field the following year was to desiccate it just prior to harvest. So that indicates that we've had a substantial reduction in field activity. So in the economic benefit of this was somewhere between $350 and $400 million a year. So on the environmental side, I think where it starts to get really interesting, and this is where it's going to provide a real conundrum for the environmental groups that are really opposed to biotechnology and genetically modified crops, because they can no longer argue that there's no benefits to the technology, because you can see some of the things we found here. So a huge number of farmers reported increases in moisture conservation, reductions in soil erosion, things that Morris was talking about earlier through the 80s and into the early 90s. We estimated then that from farmers moving to continuous use of zero and min tillages as part of their land management strategies, that nearly 500,000 tons of carbon was sequestered, along with additional just over 500,000 tons of carbon no longer being released through field passes. When we look at some of the changes in herbicide use that resulted from this, we estimated that there was about 2.5 million tons of chemicals applied to canola fields in 2006, and had GM canola varieties, herbicide-tolerant varieties, not been developed, that would have required an additional 4.1 million kilograms of chemical to be applied to those fields. So we've seen GM varieties, corn, canola, soybeans, spread rapidly across all of the provinces in the last 5 to 6 years. 2 years ago, Manitoba became the second largest soybean producing province in Canada, surpassing Quebec. In our own province, we've got 13 million fewer acres of summer fallow than we did in the mid to late 1970s. So we know there's been a substantial transition of land management practices away from intensive tillage to sustained and minimal tillage, largely due to effective weed control that's come as a result of herbicide-tolerant crops. So what's the cost of non-adopting? I had a master's student that just completed up last fall, looked at the Australian situation. So in 2004, their federal government approved GM canola to be adopted nationally. However, a lot of environmental groups and the commodity industry decided that there might be the potential for price premiums from non-GM canola. So their main GM producing states put in moratorium against the production of GM canola. So what we did is we said, okay, well, what would have happened had those moratoriums not been put in place? And so we looked at that first decade of adoption, potential adoption from 2004 to 2014, and said, based on GM canola adoption in Western Canada, what could the situation look like in Australia? And you can see the environmental impacts are substantial. 6.5 million kilograms of chemical were used in Australia over that 10-year period. 7 million field passes, over 8.5 million liters of diesel used, 24 million kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions resulted from this. So the environmental impact of not adopting herbicide-tolerant canola was 14% higher than had they adopted the GM canola initially from 2004. It ultimately cost their farmers almost $500 million in economic benefits. There's the 3 papers that we put out if you're interested in this. And one of the interesting things that comes out of this is the ability to increase plants' ability to fixate carbon. There's been some research done over the last sort of 1.5 to 2 years that shows that through genetic modification and some of these new plant breeding techniques, that plants have been created that can increase their ability to sequester carbon by 20 to 40%. Now, I haven't seen any results on what that might mean for yield, but if we looked at this from a Western Canadian perspective to increase potentially 25 or 30% of our plant's ability to sequester carbon, we'd have increased plant mass that should correlate to increased yields as well. But I think there's a tremendous benefit behind the potential of science to deliver these technologies to agriculture over the next decade. The real question is going to be, will the politics of biotechnology allow these technologies to reach you and your fields? So part of the research I've been working on now is to reconstitute this farm survey to get a better understanding of what actually the greenhouse gas reductions are on your fields. So we've got an online survey, the URL's right there. We've split this into 4 components, one that looks at sort of seed, harvesting, all the passes that need to go with that. One looks at chemical use, fertilizer use, and then tillage practices. And what we're asking farmers to do is to go back to the early 90s and take us through your entire crop rotation. Nobody in Canada has a good data set as to what happened in terms of land management practices in the early 90s. There's bits of information with StatsCan and Ag Canada and crop insurance, but nobody has a thorough data set to be able to actually understand and quantify the field passes you made, the tractors you used, the burn rate on your, or the fuel use rate on your tractors, how many hours it took you to make a pass. These are the types of information we need to capture so that we can come back and argue that prairie farmers, and particularly Saskatchewan farmers, have reduced their GHG emissions by X million tons per year. So this is sort of some of the research that I've been involved with over the last year or so, and looking to continue over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. So I'm probably asking for a fairly big time commitment. So tackle this on a rainy afternoon when you can't go out to the field. It'd be greatly appreciated if you'd invest a bit of time to provide us with some of your data. Thank you very much.
We're lucky. I'm not a PhD, I just play an agronomist on television. First of all, and this isn't why I've got them sitting here, but first of all, I think we all have to give APAS a big round of applause for what they've done here. Now, at this point in the day, everybody but these guys should stand up for a second. Just everybody come to your feet and just stretch it out. For some of you, it's going to be a long drive home. For the rest of you, it's going to be a short drive to the hotel. But then you'll be sitting in the bar after that. So take this opportunity. Now, while you're standing, there's about 180 people registered for this event. So these guys are actually an overexpression of what farmers would be. And it's what farmers would be inside the Canadian system. So how many here farm, earn their living from agriculture? Okay, so that's pretty much the room, as I suspected, being in an APAS meeting. 1% of Canadians actually do that. So in the event that somebody dropped, say, $10 million over there in cash, do you think you guys could keep them from getting to it? Remember, one of them's a farmer. He's a big guy. Yeah, I know. You might get some of it, but are you going to get your fair share? Okay, you can go back and sit down more comfortably now. But we'll leave the chairs there for a second because I might come back to that. You guys won't have to sit in them. I just want you to keep in mind that they represent, out of this entire room, what is the agricultural voice. So there's not that many of us, actually, and that really does matter when you're trying to affect public opinion and when you're trying to attract research dollars, when you're trying to cause change to occur in a way that is even just recognizes the fact that you exist. Canada's GDP is at $1.6 trillion approximately, and so ag is 4% of that, produced by 1% of the population. Now, a lot more people do earn their living in agriculture and in food, but it's still a small number, and not a lot of the other people that earn their livings in agriculture and food, other than me, will be out there advocating on behalf of farmers or on behalf of scientists. There's actually fewer scientists. So they're really, and it's amazing they can attract as much money as they do, I think. And thank goodness for that. The other thing to say thank goodness for is that you're not getting one of my presentations, because it always starts out the same. It was 1923. And there's a picture of the first edition of the Western Producer up there. It was 1923, and it was shortly after that my grandmother was actually entered the University of Saskatchewan, and her parents were busy affecting the carbon cycle rather dramatically at the time because we ripped up a whole bunch of land in southern Saskatchewan down in the Regina Plains, which was grassland. I mean, if you think about what that gumbo was like, people built houses out of it. We didn't, but I mean, this is tough, heavy land with roots going down a long way, because those plants not only had to survive drought and flood and heavy clay, they had to survive a fire every 5 or 6 or 10 years came through and took everything out. So they were deeply rooted. There was a lot of carbon down there, but we fixed that. By taking out all that carbon, we actually we produced some great crops. Quite frankly, I broke up the last pasture. I would have been maybe 12 years old, taking out some of that last pasture. And it may have been broken once before, but it was, and we didn't have to fertilize that at all. It was great. But in that process that my great-grandparents and my grandparents and my father took part in, we went from about 290 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere, and that had been stable since the last ice age. For about 18,000 years, we'd had more or less stability in there, and but we really started boosting that. We're better than 400 now. I think we've heard from several presenters. But what does 400 parts per million mean? It's kind of like a greenhouse gas, per ton credit. This stuff, I mean, can I put it in a truck? Can I haul it away? Is it going to fit in a B train? How much can I compress into a tank? Because I've got some propane tanks sitting beside my grain dryer. I mean, what do I do with this stuff? Is the carbon capture system down at Estevan going to help me with that? This is hard to quantify, but we're going to get back to the 2 chairs and why that's important later. By the time we end this century, and I don't intend to be around for it, and I have one child that was born in this century, and he might make it. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But he'll be getting kind of cranky. The fact is, we'll probably be, unless we make some major changes, we'll be at 800 or 900 parts. Well, what does that mean? Because that's the same thing. We're talking about something that we can't really put in a B train or measure in a bin or put in a tank very easily. So what is that actually? What is it? Well, it's about somewhere between 2.75 and 5.5 degrees Celsius warmer than it is right now. Now, most years I would say that's going to give me more frost-free days. I like more frost-free days. But right now I'm sitting on, I've had less than 2 inches of rain since April. And I got some pretty sketchy looking, I got some real nice looking crop, but I got some real sketchy looking stuff too. And people south of me all the way down to Wyoming, from Regina to Wyoming, and all the way down through South Dakota and almost over to Minnesota, but not quite. They're not doing so well. There is some terrible looking crop, and they're not sequestering a lot of carbon right now. And that's what we're going to see more of. That raise in temperature also means we're going to lose some of the buffering in our systems, in our environmental systems. And we're going to see some big weather, some big rain, and some big heat, like we're getting these days, and some big drought. So we're going to have to manage all that stuff. But what does that really mean about this stuff that we're going to have to capture and put in a B train? Well, there might be some money involved. Even though we have trouble quantifying it, we're going to be able to use more precision agriculture. I've been keeping, we were very early into guidance, mainly because we couldn't manage our foam marker anymore. And so when you're out spraying, you learn the guidance is your friend. You could pay even 20 grand for GPS guidance tools back in the day and pay it off in the first year if you're running enough acres. Just in savings alone, let alone, that was just in chemical, not fuel, not labor, not doing a better job of farming. Well, that's 15 years ago, and look at where we are today. We actually are able, as Stuart was talking about, we've been able to save the amount of stuff we put into the fields, onto the fields. We're able to precision place fertilizer in ways that we've never been able to do, and we've been able to guide our spreaders as we put it on top of the snow, which isn't particularly where we want to go with that. But at least we know what we're putting on, and we know where we're putting it on. And that's the first step in being able to get all that data together and to figure out how we're going to fill that B train. Because hopefully we're going to get a chance to put some money in there. It might not be a B train, you'd have to be pretty large to do that, but small bills might work. But as we go through that process of quantifying everything, we're going to be using precision ag. And we're going to be keeping all that data. And are we going to be filling out forms for, as I've spent the day filling out forms before. And are we going to have problems doing that? Fewer and fewer of them, because every time we go to the field, like I was in the field yesterday morning when I was spraying, before I started, I sat there and I really want to get going. I really want to get going. Okay, it's Raine Farm, Wilcox, and I answered all the questions, filled out the form. Took me it felt like an eternity. It was probably less than 2 minutes. I filled out all the form. I put in all the environmental information, where the wind was coming from, what the temperature was. But that little step gives me data, and I've got almost a decade of data like that, and that's a valuable commodity. So what we're going to do, the way we're going to take this thing that does so hard to measure and so hard to look, well, you can't look at it, we're going to take that and we're going to put that into something we can really use, which is a data package. And now we're starting to talk about where we're going to get the money to make this work. It was 1923, where they knew what they were producing back then. They were producing something that somebody could measure. They could load it into a wagon, because that's what they were using, and they could drive those horses, up to 8 miles to town if you didn't get on the land, if you weren't able to stake your land early enough, and you could say, well, this is what I've got. Well, we've got something that we can measure, but we're going to have to measure it with models. We're going to have to measure it with data, and as we learned today, we're going to have to probably spend more to be able to figure out better ways of sequestering, because that's what we've been doing. We've been sequestering, and this is our, I think, 21st year of no-till or limited till. We do break the surface, but as little as possible. And we're not alone. There's a lot of people that have built up a lot of information and a lot of carbon. We might not get paid for those efforts. That part kind of sucks, actually, because I feel a little ripped off, even though we were early on. A few years ago, we did get a check for 1 year for 5 years of stuff that we said we did in an affidavit, but that's not going to cut it anymore in the modern carbon market. How many people here in the room, when the APAS says they were going to pull this together, how many people think about the issue as taxes, carbon taxes? Don't be shy. I'm in that group. It's carbon tax. It's one more tax, except my knee-jerk reaction was, I'm already doing everything I can to mitigate my costs. I'm putting my fertilizer in the right places. I'm using the right technology to plant my crops. The 4R system is, it's had a lot of hype, but right time, right place, right product. The fact is that when anybody who made it to 2008, if you made it as a farmer in 2008 on the prairies, mostly if you weren't doing most of those things, you didn't make it that far. 2007 was the end of the toughest 15 years in agriculture, and that includes the 30s. There was nothing tougher than that, $35 average margins. Some years you made 60 or 70, and some years you lost money 2 years in a row. So if you made it that far, that was a small miracle. But you made it that far by abandoning 50-50 summer fallow for the most part. I don't know, is there anybody from Morris left here? Anyway, they probably have a more accurate number than, about 93-95% of the prairie, the farm, the 62 million acres that's farmed on the prairies is zero-till, no reduced tillage, continuous crop. That's farmed by a smaller percentage of farmers, but as most of the land, over 75% of the land is being farmed with a recent set of equipment. In other words, some of the latest technology that's out there already. And there can be improvements to what's in place right now, but yeah, people have invested in the tools to do this. But they invested simply because they made it to 2007, and they've already figured out that we have to do things to try and maximize our water efficiency. We have to maximize our fertilizer efficiency, because fertilizer that goes into the atmosphere or leaches down into water is unavailable to plants, and I don't make money when it's not available to plants. I only make money when it's available to a plant. And as everybody in this room knows, that's what carbon efficiency is all about. I mean, if you're blowing a lot of black out of a stack on a 20-year-old tractor, well, you might actually be making more money doing that, considering the price of new tractors. But the fact is that you probably do look at your diesel fuel bill, and in another few years, unless fuel is exempt, you're going to be looking at another 30 or 15 cents right now per liter. And I just called for fuel yesterday, so I know what that's going to do to me, because I quickly quantify that these days and think about what I'm not going to do or have to tell Kitty she's not going to be able to buy. Now, mitigation is so if we feel like we've mitigated, okay, it's going to be hard to get mitigation, but there is some good research. There's some very good research out there that says we're going to get some opportunities to mitigate our releases. They're possibly going to be enhanced systems for that. Maybe some of those taxes we're going to pay in whatever form they come in, and they're going to come, as reluctantly as I say that, well, we're going to be able to say, well, maybe we can transfer some of that into research that's going to help us do more mitigation. But is Canada doing, are we going to do something that's just a drop in the bucket internationally? I mean, we are a major exporter of food, but ultimately, Kansas grows more wheat. So are we a big producer of can we really change this formula around? No, we're going to. I mean, yes, we have a lot of carbon stored in our forests and in our landscape and in the 110 million acres of pasture that's out there in the west here, and that's great. But we're going to have to look at that and say, are we really that important? Let's think back to the that money that was going to be in the middle of the room over there, and the two chairs. Well, the answer is yes. There's probably going to be some money available because we have the ability. We have this major natural resource, and if we can cause the public policy in Canada to work in our favor, we get a chance to go and get that money. Because everybody else is going to happily get out of the way, because you guys are just going to, yeah, let them have it, because they're doing the right things. But we have to be able to prove it. We're going to have those data sets. We have to be able to show that we've invested in research. We're going to have to be able to show that we're creating something that we can put in the B train, or at least have a model that says we're putting it into a B train. And that's going to take some acceptance of the fact that this is all going to take place. It's just an event like this event, actually there isn't any event like this. That's the thing about this. There is no event like this. This is a very special event because you're getting the opportunity to actually be able to, be far better educated in this one area, this broad topic, this one area. You're going to walk away from this as people that are better informed to help government make decisions. And ultimately, this is going to, I know it's a tough time of year to be picking up the phone and interrupting an MP or an MLA's summer vacation. Lord knows I hate doing that myself. As a reporter, sometimes I've been known to put off a call till later in the evening. Oh, did I wake you? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just got off the sprayer. But the fact is that making those calls and getting that attention and writing those emails, and lots of farmers hate to do it. It's good to talk about doing it, but it's that effort to actually cause that lobbying to take place, whether you're doing it, encouraging other members of your farming operation to do it, encouraging other APAS members to do it, encouraging non-municipal members to see the real value of an organization like APAS, because this sort of thing doesn't take place on its own, and this organization put together the opportunity for you to become better informed and better able to manage your access to what might be a pile of money. Because when we start thinking about this is just taxes. Well, it is, and I'm sure that if it got into general revenues, even in this province, it might just disappear again. But the fact is that you're going to get the opportunity, if we can cause public policy to accommodate agriculture, you're really going to get the opportunity to share in some money, because there's going to be a lot of countries around the world, just like Canada, that aren't able to mix that. They were talking about that, was it 88 million ton gap that we might not be able to reach? Somebody's going to have to pay for that. Somebody's going to decide whether it's a Japanese malt buyer or somebody in Germany looking for some high protein wheat that they weren't able to get out of Hungary or Kazakhstan. They're going to pay for the ability to get some that's certified okay. Somebody in California, somebody in New York are definitely going to want it. And so it's bundling of data, doing what appears to be the right things, capturing some nebulous gas. I mean, we know it exists. It's there. It's just like the Easter Bunny. We know this is real. Are we gonna any of us gonna live long enough to really see it, like to really see climate change, at least a leveling off? Well, no, but we might get a chance to see the money. And this is about creating public policy that will benefit agriculture, and then allow agriculture to continue to tool up and continue to invest in research, to take checkoff dollars and put them where they belong, which is in finding ways not just to grow more crop, because if we think about what Ottawa just did, they just did something great for agriculture. It's been a long time since the federal government has turned around and said, we want you to yield more. We want you to grow more. Oh, wait a minute, that's going to take more fertilizer, man. And you also want us to cut, so we got this thing, grow more, yeah, no, we're going to invest in research, and we're going to invest in transportation, and we're going to make sure you can grow more and get it to port. Did I mention the fact that protein is nitrogen? Nitrogen, if I spread it on snow with the spreader, gas is off. But I'm going to get more out there somehow, or where it belongs. I have to get more into the plants if I'm going to actually grow more. So we have these fighting aspects of this issue. But ultimately, what we want the public to do is to create markets where we can actually say, yes, we've got a product here. It is a quality product, and we expect you to pay for it, one way or the other. But you have to remember, those two chairs represent, where you are in this room. You have to be able to convince the rest of the room that you need that pile of money. I want the pile of money. There's considering the way some of my crops look, I need some other form of income, and I wouldn't mind getting some in the form of a carbon check, because that wouldn't bother me at all. I think I'd just like to wind up by saying that as a journalist, this is probably one of the more complex things that I've covered in my career. I've covered derivatives, and derivatives are fairly, once you get used to them, they're fairly straightforward. This is not derivatives. This is a something that's got a lot of arms and legs. Every time you think you understand exactly how the carbon system works, which is, it's pretty simple. It just goes around, we plant it, it grows, we sequester something, and every time we change one thing, something else changes, something else moves on the board. So the more information that's out there, the better the quality of the information. I got to say, this is the best quality of information I've seen on this subject anywhere. And this is focused on what we can do in agriculture here on the prairies. So I think what we can all take away from this is there's now more information in the system. There's more energy in the system. We just have to make sure it gets where it's going.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And to Leon and Stuart as well. Very interesting presentations. It's interesting that there's 2 chairs there, but my information is that there's 40% of the income in the province comes from the agricultural industry, farmers and everybody else. And so just think about 40% of the audience is directly receiving their income from agriculture, and that's something to not be forgotten. Just because you're not a primary producer, as is evidenced by these guys and the Morris Company, etc., they're making their dollars on what happens as well. And I think, you know, we've been so busy with our head down in agriculture, we forget to educate the public about our part in what's going on. And I appreciate what the Western Producer does in that regard. In fact, there was a really good article that I'd like to plug that the Western Producer had in a couple of weeks ago that kind of went, it had to do with Stats Canada reporting and the figures that actually come to I suggest you all go and read it as far as what your clearance and your margin is, and I highly recommend that you take a look at that, because the Western Producer the Western Producer had an excellent article on it, and I just think it's really good. I like what we have heard today because I find it to be applicable. And there's nothing worse than going to a conference where you hear lots of information, but you say, well, what's my takeaway from this? And I think we've all got stuff to go home and think about. But right now, I would like to have some questions, and I've blathered on here while you guys think of your questions, but we do have time, so please proceed to the microphone and to ask your question. And when you're recognized, state your name, organization you represent, and which panelist you would like to direct that question to. And again, one question if you could, and we have 2 people lined up and eager to go. So.
Thanks, Marion. Don Connick with APAS, and if I might be granted the latitude, a comment to Dr. Smythe and a question for Dr. Kochian, is that correct? First of all, Dr. Smythe, I believe during the 1980s, the Saskatchewan Research Council conducted a sort of a farm fuel project where farms kept track of all the fuel they used, the hours they put in, and that sort of thing. And if that would be helpful, I'm sure that's still in the archives someplace. The other question is in regard to the efficiency of the root system. And I need to understand, first of all, because I see a difference in efficiency, and I to demonstrate this, put it in terms of the beef herd. Like we used bulls that some of them are efficient grazers, but what we really needed was efficient conversion of that grass into beef. And so my concern is that, yes, we can make the roots more efficient at foraging for limited micronutrients and for nutrients like phosphorus, but all of those are ultimately limited. So does this research also include a more efficient conversion of the phosphorus and the micronutrients into sugars and starches, or is it just a way of more efficient extraction from the soil?
That's a very good point, and it depends on the nutrient. I mean, I'll focus on phosphorus because that's where we've been in recent years. Early in that area of research, people looked at both phosphorus acquisition efficiency and phosphorus utilization efficiency, and really the limiting step when they looked at a number of different species and the genetic variation within them was acquisition efficiency. So I think maybe plants, and phosphorus is involved in so many different processes, like along with nitrogen, probably the 2 most widely utilized essential nutrients. It's the acquisition that's the rate limiting step. So there I'm confident, yeah, that was surprising because as we started identifying genes for phosphorus biosynthetic pathways in terms of incorporating it into different things like nucleic acids and also the things like that, it turned out none of that really related to the difference in tolerance to low P. It was acquisition, and it wasn't the transporters, it was the roots. You got to put the roots where the phosphorus is, and then they can work their magic to get it. So I'm comfortable there with that. That is the limiting step. With nitrogen, I think you have both. It's a little different. There is a root issue, that's pretty important, but there is certainly, I think, efficiencies for incorporating that nitrogen into different metabolic pathways. So nitrogen's a little different in that both are important. So it'd be, I guess, from the genetic point of view, a more complex trait with more genes involved than phosphorus.
Thank you.
Yes, Rick Jansen, APAS. Thanks for your presentation, Michael. I guess you talked about us getting a piece of that $10 million, and I think that's the big issue that we have right now. We see environmental groups, they seem to lobby very well because they get the people behind them. We see stuff coming out all the time, and I think that's our next big issue as farmers is getting the general public behind us on the issue of carbon sequestration and the good things that we do for, for the environment and stuff. So.
I'd just say that it's, right now there is an opportunity out there. I mean, how many people are involved in organic agriculture in the room? About the same as there are taxpayers in the agricultural, or farmers are in the, relative to the greater Canadian society. The fact is there's a great opportunity. We're seeing a lot of warm fuzzies out there for organics. We're not seeing a lot of warm fuzzies for biotech. We're not seeing a lot of we're not seeing we're not seeing a lot of warm fuzzies out there for commercial agriculture. We're not seeing warm fuzzies for farmers that are operating in tens of thousands of acres, or even fives of thousands of acres. But the fact is that we have an opportunity with climate change to tell a different story and say that we are actually making significant changes to the way the planet is handling carbon. And this is our opportunity, and opportunities like this don't come along. They're kind of like 2008. How many years do we think that would last? Say 5? No. The fact is that those opportunities don't come along that often. And this is an opportunity to get the public thinking, hey, biotechnology is working for me. It's working for the environment. Otherwise, there's tillage. I mean, one of my first responses a couple of years ago when we started talking about Canadian carbon taxes, I said, I'm going to have to buy a cultivator. Because, I mean, if we're going to get paid for, for changing our ways, first I got to go back to the old way so I can get paid to change back again. So.
David Larson, agronomist, CNH. My question is for Dr. Kochian. Increasing root biomass and changing the root structure, that seems like really good ideas to me. My question is more about the soil that the roots go into. It's 80, 100 years of soil degradation with 20 maybe years of small improvements to the soil quality. We're dealing with a really degraded resource. We have tried to manipulate the soil quality through tillage to increase the ability of root development. Now we're not doing that. We're seeing, but the compaction is quite high in our soils, especially at that 30 to 40 centimeter depth range. And what I'm seeing is really changed root architecture because of this compaction, and probably greatly diminished root development. Can you comment?
Yeah, I agree. Root architecture is in many ways an extremely complex trait because the roots respond to chemical, biological, and the physical traits. And as we study them in the lab, you have to always be aware of how many things we're missing. Now, for example, along the lines of the root compaction, as when people first started using like X-ray CT scanners for roots, and there's a colleague of mine at University of Nottingham, And he hired a soil scientist to run that whole area, because he was saying, you know, you guys talk about your architecture, and there's all this variation, but we have these cylinders of soil, and if there's a crack, any kind of a break, that's where the roots grow. They're gonna follow the path of least resistance. And the other thing, our roots are hygrotropic. They grow towards water too. So yeah, I don't have an answer. Maybe one of the things that we can start doing is trying to develop screens, more sophisticated screens, like for roots that have more power to like break through hardpan, like some of the prairie grasses, I understand, can be pretty powerful. So I don't know. I'm winging this answer right now. But I do think that we'll be able to get more sophisticated. I'm just wondering, could we use roots to help uncompact soil? I have no idea. But that's one of the reasons I chose coming here. I'm a plant biologist. They have this great cadre of plant breeders, but there's also a very good soil science department. I'm actually said, no, I want to be both a professor in soil science and plant science, because now agriculture is a big biology, a big science, and we need not just the plant biologists and the microbiologists and the soil scientists, but we work now with engineers and physicists and computer scientists. So I don't have an answer, but you're right. It made me realize, coming back to some of my thoughts about the physical properties of the soil are really important too. But I'm wondering if we could use certain genotypes to actually help increase the friability of the soil. So
I would say we have time for one more question, and then we'll conclude. That would be you, Merv.
I just have a little comment when you were talking about will we see it. You know, it doesn't really matter. No matter what we do, in what field we are doing it for the people of the future. Our kids, their kids, and the kids that come way after them, I hope. And it doesn't matter whether we see it or not. If we realize it's important and it should be done, then let's do it.
That didn't sound like a question, Merv, but it was a good conclusion. So thank you very much, Leon, Stuart, and Michael, for partaking in the panel. And you guys, you can go if you like now. Before our APAS president does his closing remarks, I'd like to make my remarks as far as I want to inform all participants here today that we will be sending out a feedback survey for the Carbon Summit by email. This is one of those pieces of paper that's really important, and I hope you understand the importance of that, because the survey will be your chance to let us know what you as an individual got out of the summit and which areas you feel should see more support in research efforts and further discussion as we go forward. So we thank you in advance for your feedback. The information will help us as an organization in our planning of future events like this to better serve you. And I know that APAS will be following up with some topics as early as this fall at our annual general meeting, to which you're all, of course, encouraged to attend. So I'd like to now ask President Todd to come up and finish off our conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks for a good job, Marion, and all our chairs here. Norm wasn't here today. He's currently probably landing in Newfoundland for the federal CFA meetings next week. But thank you to Rick and Marion for their job today. It was excellent. Well, we sure had a crash course on carbon and agriculture. And you know what? I've got some remarks here that were prepared for me, just kind of going over all the different presentations and so on. But you know, one real takeaway I think I get here is that, you know, we talk about Western Canadian agriculture being world class and, you know, we're leading edge and everything else. But, you know, one takeaway I really get is boy, we've got a research community based in Western Canada here that really is world class, and you know, they support us. You know, and you know, certainly as producers, we put research dollars, you know, into their pockets. We push governments to have research, and I mean, it's situations like this. If we didn't have this research and we don't have these people working for us, we'd be in a really bad position here to fight the fight that we have in front of us here to get recognition for what we've been doing. So, I mean, just can't thank enough. You know, Western Canada, we have a great group of researchers. You know, government researchers, Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada. You know, certainly the U of S here, GIFs. You know, we're really fortunate to have these people working on our behalves, and thank you so much for all your expertise and everything you brought to this conference. Okay. I'll go back to the prepared part. On behalf of the Agriculture's Producer Associations of Saskatchewan, I'd like to thank all the experts. It is essential that we stay in touch with you and we can continue with our conversations with the scientific and research communities and, you know, recognize what they're doing for us. Thanks to all the participants that came, you know, on some nice days here in July, in the middle of summer on a Thursday and Friday. Certainly, I'm the last guy between most of you and maybe you're going to the lake or certainly a beer anyway. But thanks to all the participants for their attention and for the questions and comments that we had. I think we have to thank our video staff. They've recorded this. They've done a great job. Hope we haven't been in your way because you know, you guys have done just an excellent job, and I think we had reports basically throughout the streaming part of this that you know, we had up to 200 viewers, and this afternoon we even had quite a few viewers from the United States. So this has been a really important part of this. You know, we at least doubled the participation probably, and certainly this will be recorded and distributed to a lot of our cable users in the province, Shaw and Access, and it will be broadcast many times over the next months, and so it's I think this what we put together here really will set a standard hopefully for, you know, to begin the discussion and get things going on this carbon pricing model. Certainly, talking about the video, we wouldn't have had it without the Western Producer's support. The Western Producer were involved with us right from the start of this whole process, them and GIFs both, and a big thank you to them for their participation. Okay. As Marion said, there is a survey coming out. We also will be preparing a summary report and recommendations from this summit. As part of the project, we will be in touch with all of you to get further comments on what we have learned here today. And safe travels to everyone, and looking forward to it. I think as an industry, you know, it's only two chairs. We have to work together. I think we've had a great cross-section of the industry here today. I don't think this issue pits environment against farmers, against ranchers, any of this. You know, our development commissions, everybody needs to pull in the same direction here, and I think interprovincially we have to do some work too to get, if we have one voice, we're going to have a lot more success in trying to affect the policy on this issue. So thanks again, and everybody drive home safe.